What do award-winning indie game Balatro and largest multimedia franchise in the world, PokéMon, have in common? Cards! So let's combine them. Good morning, folks. My name is Lino, and today I'll be designing some Pokémon-themed Jokers for Balatro. This is for a project called PokéMon, a mod for Balatro that aims to add every single Pokémon to Balatro as a Joker. This video will focus on some custom guest arts for the Ghastly line. These won't be the first I've done, but at the request of a friend, I thought it would be interesting to document my process while I work on these. Starting with Ghastly here, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to do. As with any large-scale pixel art, I started with a sketch that I would later use as a template. Here you can see that I used a watercolor brush for that authentic Sugimori flavor, and then I carved his features out of the smog with an eraser. The background was sketched out with different colors, so I could easily hide them when I imported the sketch to Sprite. With the actual sprite, I pull in my sketch to sit behind the canvas. This helps me get a good feel for the composition and placement of Ghastly. Then I start tracing the important features in black to get the shape down. Because of how incorporeal the subject is, I'll be making heavy use of dithering to emphasize the smogginess. You can see that there's already a border here. For guest arts, there's a flexible standard for what your Joker should look like. They need the name of the card as well as the Joker text, and the type icon has to be in a specific place, and using a specific sprite, so that it all lines up in-game. The border itself has been edited slightly from the given template, but it's mostly in line with the others. Here I start with the background, what's meant to be gravestones emerging from a nasty fog. It wasn't easy coming up with colors for this, although I'm pleased with what I eventually decided on. For cards like these, I tend to use softer, more pastel colors for the background to give more of a focus on the subject. You can see when defining the fog I use long, single pixel streaks that jut in and out to give a sort of painterly feel, and that's something you'll continue to see with the other sprites in this showcase. And here it is, Ghastly, the gas Pokemon. I'll also do shinies of each, starting with this nice subtle blue variation. When I do shinies, I like to change the backgrounds in some way to distinguish the two. Grayscale is my go-to, and it works well here. And now for Haunter. After doing some research on his different designs over the years, I chose the 4-fingered variant over the 3-fingered look, simply because I prefer the aesthetic. You'll see that the hands are very separate from the main body, and that's so that I can move the body parts around in the frame. I wasn't so sure how well he'd fit on the card. This card also introduces layers. You can see all that negative space there on the left, which is where his right hand will be. This card takes advantage of the soul layer, a second layer that sprites can sit on, which floats just above the main layer. Here it gives the impression that Haunter is reaching out through the card, as if since his evolution he's become more corporeal. After getting the outlines and color blocks in, I start adding highlights in white, which is typical of sprites I make in this style. Then I fill in darker spots, and start softening up the transitions with those same 1 pixel wide streaks. I like using color from the early watercolor key art because of how distinct it is. A lot of this step is just doing anti-aliasing, cleaning up the edges of shapes, and getting the contours I want. I wanted to pull for more than just the key art, so Haunter's reaching hand here has a red glow like his Generation 2 and 3 sprites had. Finally, I start working on the backdrop, which if you remember I didn't include in my original sketch. Sometimes I don't have ideas for it until after the character sprite is done, so I'll start with a compressed stock image and sort of spitball from there. Eventually, I landed on this neat little assortment of blue candles, which I think complements him nicely. Coming in hot is Haunter, the gas Pokemon. I'm really pleased with the way this one came out. It's just so dynamic and interesting. I made sure his tongue was sticking out for the shiny form so that I could recolor it blue. It certainly pays off. This is one Sinister Spectre. And if you use a linking cord on Haunter, it evolves into Gengar. Very little trial and error went into this Gengar here. I knew pretty much exactly what I wanted to do with him, as I think the sketch demonstrates. I would end up ditching the background that I sketched here in favor of a more subtle vignette. It was originally meant to look like the forest in the intro of Fire Red, but the gimmick I had in mind didn't mesh well with the idea. Though he's a sort of bluish right now, by the end he'll be fully black. I obviously took heavy inspiration from the Generation 2 sprite, which is where I took the colors from. I always find that on sprites like these that are fairly large, some subtle anti-aliasing can go a long way to make the art feel authentic and intentional. Speaking of which, because Gengar will be floating above the rest of the card on the Soul layer, here I do some anti-aliasing in 50% transparent black. I don't usually do this, but because he'll be floating above a background which can change color, it's going to go a long way to emphasizing his features when he's not so hidden. We'll get to that. Here, I fiddle around with the background a bit before eventually settling on the aforementioned vignette. Arriving just on time is Gengar, the Shadow Pokemon. I hope its designation makes it clear what the idea here is. He's pretty tough to make out on the backdrop right now, which is entirely intentional. Since Gengar's special ability is making Jokers negative, I thought I'd have him be hidden unless he's negative himself. That's why I chose to add that transparent anti-aliasing. Plus, that's not the only possible change to the made card layer. Every edition makes him more visible, including the shiny, which gets its Generation 2 colors and some fancy pink fog to boot. A lesser man might have stopped there, but I went the extra mile and included Mega Gengar, since he's also available in the mod currently. Ideas were sparse, but after some experimentation with his model from Sun and Moon, and some spitballing among friends, we came up with this. He's meant to be holding onto the edges of the card and sort of emerging from its surface. Starting with the sketch, I don't have a whole lot to say. I fiddled around quite a bit with his hands, but eventually I found something I liked, and then I rotated these outlines in software to get the angle I wanted. The colors were fun. I didn't have any Sugimori work to reference, so I sort of came up with it as I went along, resulting in a nice, clean gradient. This border is also custom, though again it has to follow certain constraints for usage in the mod. I ended up shading the body in a similar watercolor style to some of my other works, which I think gives Mega Gengar here a neat look. And of course, those same streaks to add character. The backdrop was straightforward too, just some concentric circles that I messed up with Sprite's jumble tool and then cleaned up with the median filter. And so finally, we have Mega Gengar. I think he gives off real nasty vibes here, like he's trying to attack you through the screen. Everybody's favorite ghostly shiny is here too, with nice deep purple hues for the limbs because I was never a big fan of the placid pink of the original design. With that, the set is complete. All three of Generation 1's original Ghost Pokemon, and a Mega to boot. I had considered doing Gigantamax Gengar as well, but they're not in the mod yet, so I figured I'd save it for when they are. My personal favorite is Haunter. He's got a real bad attitude, which I think suits the character well. Do you have a favorite? Let me know. And if you found my process interesting and you'd like to see more, engagement goes a long way. I'll definitely be working on more of these in the future. I just enjoy the process so much. Bye for now, have a blessed day.